Like Encanto.
Yeah,
like Encanto. Same
Encanto
thing.
was their own fault. And I remember reporting on that with Paulie.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about how they were just like systematically keeping that movie down for some reason. It's like we couldn't understand it. They weren't advertising it all. They weren't getting behind it at all. Like I didn't even know it existed until Paulie had brought it up to me. And they didn't even start advertising that film until like the week it came out, it felt like.
I don't think they even wanted to. They didn't even care about putting it into theaters. They were doing it to satiate some of the creatives at Disney at the time. I think putting it in theaters, they would have been more content to just dump it straight on Disney Plus because
it was on Disney Plus 30 days later.
Yeah, by Christmas Eve, it was on Disney Plus, Paulie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know the viral TikTok wave of billions didn't happen until January and February, and that's where it just went.
Yep.
Families, kids. I mean, so yeah, and it's like we talked about. It was the number one streaming movie for Disney Plus last year, guys, and it's still in the top 10.
And not only that, we kind of touched on the idea of, they talk about this constant representation. Well, what do we say is the most underrepresented group in entertainment? Well, it's clearly, the Latin community. And when you do a movie like Encanto, which plays directly to said community, why aren't you getting behind it? It made no sense. I mean, to me, it was a dumb move on Disney's part, and they've made some really dumb moves in the last few years, and we're looking at one of them right here on the screen.
Well, this is one of my, in the video I did a few days ago, VR, and guys, I pointed out 3 Disney-owned films. What they all have in common, they all happen to have a strong Latino storyline, either written, directed by Latinos, whatever, how it is you want to frame it. Mm-hmm. That Disney completely dropped the ball or shelved. Because, that was Encanto, Flamin Hot, and Sound of Freedom.
Oh, Sound of Freedom, yeah.
I didn't even know about Flaming Hot, to be honest with you.
Flaming Hot, they messed up real bad. That should have been in theaters. There was a lot of buzz around that movie when it came out.
It was made for less than $20 million. Again, Fox and Eva had to scratch
and it's the same
claw
mistake
to get that money.
Yeah, and it's the same mistake. No, go ahead, Paulie. I'm sorry.
No, just saying really quick. From a friend that we know that's in the film, Tom, a director that we know who's also acting in the film. He was telling me just they absolutely got no support from Disney. In part two, which is kind of not cool, but the main producer behind Flaming Hot is a faith-based producer, African American gentleman from Will Smith's. He was in Will Smith's Prodigy. He's produced a lot of faith-based movies. He's stuck with Flaming Hot for 7 years and got it done, but they gave him no money.
That was
and what I was going to say real quick, Valiant, I was just going to say they made the same mistake with those films as they did with Enchanted 2 and Hocus Pocus 2, which regardless of the quality, let's face it, those movies would have made bank at the box office. What were they thinking?
Yeah.
They would have beat Indy. They would have beat Indy by a bunch.
Easy.
Yeah.
Especially Hocus Pocus 2. There was a pent up want for that sequel.
Yeah. Somebody's got a bark.
Or demand, desire, whatever you want to call it. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
That's one of my dogs.
That's too little for Sadie.
I was wondering.
Yeah, it's too little.
I was going to say real quick, Disney's had a pattern with the Fox acquisition titles. If y'all haven't noticed, like especially right after 2021 and the theaters reopened up in that year, they had several Fox titles that they had acquired in the deal. And Disney sent them to theaters basically because they kind of had to, but they gave them no support, like no marketing budget. And the theaters didn't even argue with them because they were so desperate at that point for anything in the theaters to get people back in, to get the habit going. They didn't even seem to argue with Disney about the fact that they were just going to throw them junk to throw in there and not even back it up with much of a marketing budget.
In regards to Spanish media and the treatment of Sound of Freedom, it's been absolutely exceptional. Like you're like not hearing any of this goofiness from from that market. And I put the numbers in the chat. You've seen the staggering Hispanic audience going to see this film.
It's a huge story.
Let me tell you, I covered that when I did the video this morning on the box office. One of the things that I hit in that video was the fact that in the Deadline magazine, D'Alessandro, every weekend when he does the domestic stuff, they get the data from intelligence and ComScore and PostTrack and all this stuff.
PostTrack, yeah. I love those.
And he talks about the demographic makeup. What was it? Well, Deadline would bend over backwards and jump through hoops in celebration of having a 20 to 25% Latino and Hispanic representation as a demographic audience for a given film.
Right.
This movie had 30% of the audience that showed up was Hispanic and Latino.
Right. And this is in the U.S., guys.
Yes.
And then, right. We often overperform.
Well, because it is an epidemic down in South America and Mexico. But as Paulie was pointing out, and they dance around it in this movie, where do you think that a lot of these people are coming from? Where do you think the number one consumers are?
They know.
Consumer, yeah.
That community understands
heavy,
it because a lot of them.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Paul. You were making a point there. My
No,
bad.
the only point is that, is in regards to Sound of Freedom, the Spanish, coverage has been, really exceptional. And the like you said, 30% of the market were Hispanics, and we're 19% of the population here. And you see that kind of week after week on the movies that are big hits. It was from Scream to Creed to Mario, Avatar, even Sisu. These movies all had a really strong U.S. Latino money. They're the biggest ones. They're the biggest group right now that are going to see films over and over again.
Paulie, listen to this.
You're right.
43% non-white attendance for this film in its debut week. 43%.
Wow.
Not only that,
very high.
58% female attendance.
Right.
These are the kind of statistics that would normally have some of the YouTube bloggers out there dancing and singing the praises of the film. But because the strongest markets are South, Central, and middle of the states, well, they hate it.
I don't get that. I actually don't agree with that. I don't know where they got that from because, if that's the case of the 30%, you got to take into account for the West. I mean, like what? Wait a minute.
Well, I think was it? I have to pull it up, Pro. I think it was South and Southwest is how they classified it, and then
it's South, Central, and
Right.
middle of the country. I don't know what middle of the country means.
Yeah,
I got to break
like,
that down to me.
Heartland, Rust Belt. I mean, yeah. And people in the chat, I noticed just real quick asking, why is he saying Latino and Hispanic? Because that's literally how they do it on the survey, and that's what Deadline quotes. They actually say Latino/Hispanic or Latino and Hispanic.
But just imagine.
I know they're the same things. I get it.
Imagine any movie. Imagine any movie that had these sorts of statistics, right? This kind of statistic for non-white attendance and these kind of statistics for the female overrepresentation in the audience. They would be astounded and pleased with it. But because of the subject matter, they despise it.
Well, Indiana Jones, a very low Latino U.S. market turnout.
I noticed that.
They paid for it, man. They're paying for it. They went back to see these other films and then
Paulie, I remember you said this brilliantly one time. You said that Hollywood does not put Latin actors and Latina actresses into movies because they know you'll go see them regardless. So they don't have to pander to you.
Well,
That's
they'll
the way
pander
you
and
see
give you
it.
10 minutes of Antonio Banderas.
Is that old saying of the soft bigotry of low expectations, and that's always been a hallmark of it. I think
they're taking the audience for they're taking them for granted, is what I was trying to say. But anyway,
no, I think you're right. I just think all I was going to add to that, Tom, was I think that has metastasized out to a lot of audiences, not just relegated to Black or Latino or whatever. I think it's everywhere. I think that when you look at what Hollywood pumps out nowadays, they just take for granted everybody. Hey, if we put Star Wars in front of it or Marvel in front of it or some big IP name that people know, people are going to show up and buy tickets. No, they're not anymore. They're much more discerning in 2023 than they were maybe even in 2019 with where they're spending their dollars and going to the theater. And you can call it as a side impact at a macro level of inflation or other economic pressures out there. And that's all fine and dandy. But what I see is, it's like I've said before, I don't think there's a superhero fatigue per se. I think there's a crappy movie fatigue. And people are just getting tired of spending money in 3 hours of their lives going to and from a theater to sit through another slog of the same thing over and over again that's just not entertaining anymore. And then you get a movie like this that comes out that's actually something gripping and different than what Hollywood has been pumping out, and Hollywood can't stand it.
Well, Hollywood can't stand that the Hispanic Latino community is
what's
the traditional value movies.
The terminology.
Well,
Steven?
There's some bickering in the chat. All right, U.S. Latino, the U.S. Latino market is what I'm talking about. Whether I call them Latino or Hispanic, I'm not talking about any foreign country that's in Latin America or Spain. You know, I'll respect to that. That's a different market, complete, even different from Mexico. I'm talking about U.S. Latino market, over 20 million people here in the States, whether they're Spanish speaking or not, bilingual, U.S. English leaning. That's the market that we're talking about, especially too when VR talks about them in the box office terms. So that's
and exactly, Paulie. Thank you, because to your point, the statistics that we're discussing in the Deadline article that D'Alessandro put out from ComScore and PostTrack and all that is specifically relevant to the U.S. market. So that's what that 30% represents. We're not talking about globally. We're talking about strictly in the domestic market box office for this film.
Renegade on